A judge thought he was being clever playing truth or lie with a 25-year-old woman until she flipped the courtroom upside down. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio was colder than it needed to be, not just from the overworked air conditioning that hummed too loud for comfort, but from the way people looked at Elena Jefferson, like she was a fragile exhibit behind glass. She sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap, wearing that yellow cardigan she always wore when she was nervous. Her roommate had ironed it the night before, even though Elena told her not to. It didn't matter. 25 years old, barely 5 feet tall, bright brown eyes that looked too calm for her age. The courtroom was half full. A few reporters, some caseworkers, her close friends, Deborah and Stan Greer, sat on the left side of the room. On the right, a woman with tight curls and a stiff red blazer clutched a tissue in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Elena knew her name was Celeste Boone, her biological aunt. She'd met her twice, once at a family reunion, once at a diner where Celeste spent most of the time arguing with the waitress about how cold the fries were. Elena didn't like being here, but she understood exactly why she was. Judge Gerald Norwood, in his 60s, with a pair of reading glasses hanging from his neck, sat on the bench like he'd done it 1,000 times. And he probably had. He looked at Elena like she was a chess piece that didn't belong on the board. "Miss Jefferson," he said, shuffling a few papers before leaning in slightly. "I understand this is unusual. Having a young woman testify in a guardianship dispute isn't something I take lightly." "I understand," Elena replied, voice steady. Norwood looked up, surprised by the firmness in her tone. He wasn't the only one. The court had expected nerves, maybe even hesitation, but Elena didn't fidget, didn't avoid eye contact. She just waited, calm, prepared, like someone who had already imagined this scene 100 different ways. The courtroom whispered, a cough, a pen clicking, someone's phone vibrating, and quickly silenced. Norwood cleared his throat. "You seem pretty sharp," he said, trying to loosen the mood. "I imagine you did well in school." "I did all right," she replied. He chuckled. "Modest, too." Then a pause. "Tell me something just for fun. Ever sneak a late-night snack from the kitchen?" Elena tilted her head as if dissecting the question. "That's a leading question, Your Honor. You're implying I have, rather than asking if I did." Someone in the gallery coughed into a laugh. Norwood raised his eyebrows. "Well then," he said, "how about we play a little game to loosen things up? I ask a few questions. You tell me, truth or lie." Elena looked around the room once, then nodded. "Okay, but I might ask questions too." He blinked. Fair enough. But from the moment the first question left his mouth, the judge realized this wouldn't be a game. Elena wasn't here to play. She was here to change everything. Judge Norwood leaned back, a faint smile playing on his face. Maybe he thought he was being clever, or maybe he was just trying to break the ice in a room full of tension. Either way, he looked over his glasses and said, "All right, Miss Jefferson, truth or lie, you've stayed up past midnight more than once this week." Elena didn't blink. "True, but I was reading the Family Law Journal of Ohio 2022 edition." The courtroom chuckled again, softer this time, more confused than amused. Norwood squinted at her. "Family Law Journal, huh?" "Yes, sir. It's available online for public access," she said. "That's where I read about best interests of the individual being the standard in guardianship cases." The judge cleared his throat, sitting up straighter now. "All right, how about this one? You've ever skipped work pretending to be sick?" "Lie," Elena said flatly. "I haven't missed a day in 3 years." "Poi." That's when attorney Benjamin Rohr, the lawyer for Celeste Boone, leaned forward, thick-framed glasses, slicked-back hair, and a confidence that had probably served him well until this very moment. "Your Honor, if we could return to the relevant facts." But Norwood raised a hand, silencing him without a word. His eyes were on Elena. Something had shifted. He adjusted his seat again. "All right, my turn's up." "Go ahead, Miss Jefferson. Ask me one." Elena paused, then said, "Truth or lie, you've already made a decision in your head about who I should be with." The room went still. Even Rohr sat back. Norwood hesitated, then gave a soft sigh. "Truth?" Elena nodded. "I figured." She looked toward her aunt. Celeste straightened, clearly feeling the attention now focused on her. "Truth or lie?" Elena asked. "You told the caseworker you could provide for me better than the Greers because you make more money." Celeste blinked. True, she said slowly. That's a fact. Then why do the electric bills in your name show 4 late payments in the past 6 months? Elena asked. The room gasped, not dramatically, but just enough to feel it. Celeste's mouth opened, then closed. Elena reached into the small tote bag beside her and pulled out a folded document. Public records. I looked them up last week at the library downtown. It's all there. Roar stood up quickly. Objection, Your Honor. This is completely inappropriate. It's relevant, Norwood said, almost too quietly. Sit down, Mr. Roar. Elena's voice didn't waver. She turned back to the judge. Truth or lie? A person's voice should matter in decisions about their own life. He looked at her long and hard. Truth, he finally answered. Elena exhaled, her fingers finally relaxing in her lap. Then I'd like to speak for real. Not about snacks, not games, just the truth. The judge nodded once, slowly. The game was over. But what came next would no longer be in the adult's control. The court clerk scribbled something into her notepad. The stenographer's fingers didn't miss a beat, and Judge Norwood, now fully upright in his chair, motioned gently with his hand. You may speak, Miss Jefferson. Elena took a second before answering, not out of fear. She was just thinking, lining things up. Not the way most people might tell a story, wandering off into sidebars or pausing to check if someone was still listening. No, Elena was surgical. I've lived in 6 places in 7 years, she began, her voice clear and calm. Some of them were okay. One had a neighbor who played loud music all night. One smelled like onions and cheap air freshener. One, she paused, had a landlord who locked the thermostat. There was no drama in her tone, no victimhood, just facts. But the Greers, she continued, glancing toward her friends. They're different. They didn't ask me what happened to me. They asked what I liked to eat, what books I liked. They didn't treat me like a case file. Deborah Greer wiped her eyes quietly. Stan held her hand under the table, trying to keep himself composed. Mrs. Boone, Elena turned toward her aunt. You told my caseworker that you should have guardianship because you're blood, but you didn't reach out to me until the court got involved. Celeste shifted, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not mad about that, Elena said quickly. I'm just saying I've had to take care of myself for a long time, so I notice when people show up because they have to, versus when they actually want to. Judge Norwood tapped his pen against his desk, but didn't interrupt. Elena leaned forward slightly in her chair. Do you want to know why I started reading about family law? He gave a small nod. Because people kept making choices for me without me. Grown-ups sitting in rooms just like this one saying things like, she's too young to understand, or she'll adapt. But I understand more than you think. I know what stability looks like. I know what being scared feels like. I know when someone is lying, especially when they're smiling while doing it. No one said a word, she continued more softly now. I know this isn't just about who wants me. It's about who knows me, who sees me. The Greers know I hum when I read. They know I eat my pizza backwards. They know I collect used bus passes and keep them in a shoebox because I don't know. It makes me feel like the places I've been actually mattered. That last part hung in the air longer than anything else. Roar leaned into Celeste and whispered something, but she didn't respond. Then, unexpectedly, the judge leaned in and asked, How old were you when you learned how to read legal documents? Elena looked at him without flinching. 20. I started with eviction notices. Judge Norwood stared at her. Something softened in his face, but not pity. It was recognition. He took a deep breath, then sat back. All right, Elena. Thank you. That was... He glanced at his notes, then back at her. Very helpful. She nodded. I'm not done. He blinked. You're not? No, sir. I'd like to address one of the affidavits in this case. It includes false information. The room stirred again. Roar straightened in his seat. Which affidavit? The judge asked. Elena reached into her tote again, pulled out a photocopy. This one filed by Celeste Boone. She said she had a 2-bedroom apartment, but this lease form says she lives in a 1-bedroom unit, which means she would have had to convert the living room into a bedroom. Celeste's face flushed. That was a typo. It's not just that, Elena cut in. The lease is dated 2 weeks after she filed the affidavit. Norwood narrowed his eyes. Is this document real? Yes, sir. I got it from the building manager. He let me see it because I told him I was verifying housing stability for court. I used my ID. The The courtroom wasn't whispering anymore. Everyone was just watching, listening. But Elena wasn't finished dismantling the lies yet. She was just getting started. For a moment, the courtroom went quiet in a way that wasn't awkward, but necessary, like everyone needed a breath they'd forgotten to take. Elena sat still, the lease still in her hand, not smug, not proud, just certain. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice hadn't. That mattered more. Celeste Boone sat back in her chair, arms crossed tight. Her eyes darted toward her attorney, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. He whispered something again. This time she nodded, but just barely. Judge Norwood scratched his temple with his pen, looking down at the copy of the lease Elena had handed the bailiff moments earlier. "Ms. Boone," he said carefully, "is there anything in this document that is inaccurate?" Celeste hesitated. "No, but I didn't mean to mislead anyone. I just didn't think it would be a problem. I've made space for her." With a curtain separating the bed from the kitchen, Elena asked, more out of curiosity than spite. Celeste sighed and looked away. That was the thing about silence. It didn't always mean guilt, but sometimes it was louder than any confession. Judge Norwood shifted gears. "Elena," he said, "you've clearly done your homework. You're very impressive, but what about the emotional side of this? Isn't it possible that your aunt deserves a chance to reconnect with her family?" Elena nodded. "Yes, but reconnecting doesn't mean uprooting. It means visiting, calling, sending emails, even when there's no court date coming up." That landed harder than she expected. Celeste's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Elena continued, "I know people say blood is thicker than water, but water keeps me alive. I don't need people who look like me. I need people who see me." That was the moment Deborah started crying full on. No apology. Stan just reached over and pulled her close. Roar finally stood up. "Your Honor, this has become an emotional showcase, not a legal hearing. I understand the woman is articulate, but this isn't about speeches. It's about facts and capability." Norwood didn't even look at him. She just gave us both. Elena sat back, folding her hands again. She looked at the judge calmly. "May I ask one more question, Your Honor?" He nodded. "Truth or a lie?" she said. "You ever had to grow up before you were ready?" Norwood stared at her. He didn't answer with words. He just gave a long, heavy blink and looked down at the desk. But what he didn't say told Elena everything she needed to know. Outside the courthouse windows, the sun had started to shift. That late afternoon kind of light, bright but low, crawled through the glass and stretched across the courtroom floor like it was looking for something to hold on to. Elena wasn't shaking, not anymore, but she felt the weight of every pair of eyes locked on her. She wasn't used to that, not like this, not in a way that demanded so much and gave so little back. Judge Norwood leaned forward again, elbows on the bench now. The casual tone he had used earlier was gone. His voice was more formal, measured. "Miss Jefferson," he said, "I have to make my ruling based on what is best for your long-term well-being. That includes emotional, financial, and physical stability, not just who presents themselves best today." "I understand," she replied, "but I needed to be heard today. Not because I'm trying to win anything, but because sometimes the truth gets buried under paperwork. People forget there's a person inside the file." Celeste finally stood up. For the first time since the hearing started, she addressed Elena directly. "I didn't come earlier because I didn't know how to. I wasn't ready to be anyone's guardian. I was still figuring out my life." Elena nodded once. "I know. That's why I'm not angry. I just can't afford to be someone's learning curve." The room sank into another silence, the kind that made you feel small, even if you weren't the one on trial. Roar looked like he wanted to intervene, but he didn't, probably because nothing he said now could undo what had already been done. Norwood looked at Deborah and Stan. "Mr. and Mrs. Greer, would you like to speak?" Deborah shook her head gently. Stan cleared his throat, voice cracking a little. "We came here prepared to fight, but she fought for herself. I think that says more about her than anything we could say about us." That sat heavy in the room, real heavy. Norwood turned his attention back to Elena. "You've read a lot of legal documents, right?" "Yes, sir." "Then you'll know this decision won't come down today. I'll need to review the new evidence, reconvene, and make sure everything is handled the right way." I know, she said, standing slowly. But now, at least you really see me. That's all I wanted. She gathered her tote bag, slipping the lease document back inside like it was just another library paper, but it wasn't. It was a turning point, whether the adults in the room were ready to admit it or not. She walked back toward the gallery, each step quiet, but sure. But no one in that courtroom would ever see her the same way again. The court recessed, but no one moved right away. It was like the air had thickened, as if standing too fast might knock something fragile loose. Judge Norwood exited through his side door. The clerk followed. The only sounds left were the squeak of a chair and the scratch of someone's pen. Elena sat beside Deborah and Stan now, small between them, but somehow towering over everything. Deborah leaned in. You okay? Elena nodded. Yeah, I'm okay. Just tired. Stan gave a little laugh. You cross-examined 3 adults and dismantled a housing claim in less than 20 minutes. That would wear anybody out. Elena cracked a tired smile, then looked down at her hands. Do you think he's going to send me away? Deborah opened her mouth, but Stan beat her to it. No one's sending you anywhere without a fight. And from what I just saw, you fight better than most adults I've ever met. Across the aisle, Celeste Boone sat alone. Roar was at the far end of the room, whispering to someone on the phone. Celeste stared at her purse, like it was supposed to give her answers. After a minute, she stood and walked slowly across the aisle. Elena, she said quietly. Deborah's eyes narrowed, but Elena looked up. I want to say something, Celeste continued. Not because I think it'll change anything, just because I should have said it before. Elena tilted her head slightly. I wasn't ready, Celeste said, and I lied because I thought looking like I had everything together was more important than being honest. But you made me realize the truth matters more, even if it's ugly. Elena didn't say anything right away. Then she asked, Why do you want me? The question landed heavy. Celeste blinked, searching for something real to say. Because I didn't want my sister's child to grow up thinking no one in her family cared. That's not the same as wanting me, Elena said. Celeste nodded slowly. I know. Deborah reached for Elena's hand, but didn't pull her back. This moment wasn't hers. Celeste added, If the court decides you stay with the Greers, I'll respect that. But I'd still like to visit. No court orders, just you and me, when you're ready. Elena studied her face, the kind of stare that wasn't rude, just thorough, the same way she read a document before she trusted what it said. Okay, Elena said. We'll see. Celeste took a step back and gave her space. Later in the hallway, the caseworker who'd been assigned to Elena stepped beside her. Her name was Kendra Lawson, mid-30s, glasses always slipping down her nose. She'd seen a lot of cases, but none like this. You did something rare in there, Kendra said softly. Elena shrugged. I told the truth. Yeah, Kendra said, but you didn't weaponize it. You used it like a mirror, made everybody take a look. Elena glanced up at her. That's the only way it works, right? Kendra nodded, looking more like a witness than a worker now. By the time they stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the air felt different. Not easier, not clearer, but real, and that mattered. But what came next wouldn't just be up to the court. It would be up to Elena, too. 2 weeks later, the ruling came in a plain envelope. No bold lettering, no drama, just a name typed neatly across the front. Elena Jefferson. Inside, the judge's decision was laid out in clear, direct language. No fluff, no loopholes. The court granted permanent guardianship to Deborah and Stan Greer. There was no celebration, no fanfare, just a quiet moment at the Greers' kitchen table in their modest 2-bedroom home in Akron, Ohio. Elena sat between them, the paper in her hand, eyes reading every line twice before letting herself believe it. I guess this means I can stop checking my lease every night, she said softly. Deborah reached over and gently brushed Elena's shoulder. That lease can stay signed. You're home now. Stan raised his glass of orange juice to the woman who beat the system with truth in a tote bag. They all laughed. A real one this time, not the courtroom kind. Elena smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. Can we still visit Aunt Celeste if she wants to? Of course, Deborah said. You get to choose what those visits look like. This isn't a wall. It's just the door you walked through. Elena nodded. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need an apology wrapped in ribbons. She just needed consistency, and now she had it. Weeks passed. The tote bag stayed in her closet. The bus pass shoebox grew fuller, and one day she handed Judge Norwood a handwritten letter through Kendra Lawson at a community outreach event. It read, "Thank you for not treating me like a woman who talks too much. Thank you for listening when it mattered. I hope more people get the chance to speak for themselves, not just be spoken for. Also, I was serious about snacks. I really never snuck one. No signature, just Elena." And that was it. Not a story about a woman who found a home. A story about a woman who knew what one looked like and spoke until someone finally listened. But the truth is, people don't need us to speak for them nearly as often as we think. They just need us to hand them the mic and step back. People like Elena exist everywhere, in offices, courtrooms, apartments, and quiet corners of the world where people rarely ask what they think, but they know. They notice. And when they speak, we owe them more than applause. We owe them respect. If you're a colleague, a friend, a social worker, a judge, or just someone who interacts with others, ask them. Listen like it's the most important thing you'll do that day, because it probably is. And if you're a person like Elena, don't wait for permission to tell your truth. Speak, even if your voice shakes, especially then.